engagement taking place, but there was a sense of kind of urgency and pressure. As I said, the police officers he was standing and talking and gesticulating as he was talking, and they were kind of almost, like I say, circling him in a quite a threatening sort of way. And so the conversation was intense. Afterwards, at the time that they were all doing the exercises, much more aggressive. So you could hear an aggression in the tone of the police officers themselves. And then particularly when I heard them, as I said yesterday, the only time I actually heard words was when he was asked, "Who told you to stop?" And the other was, do 10 more, and that was done very aggressively and very assertively, yeah.
You testified yesterday that there was a time where you had been removed.
Yeah.
It would look like a rolled-up newspaper.
Correct.
On paragraph 27 of your statement, on page 8 of your statement, you say twice, when Neil dropped to the ground, I could hear a loud cracking sound, which sounded like flesh being hit.
Correct.
And I witnessed one of the police officers raise the right hand and bend down at the same time as I heard the noise. Are you saying that he might have been on the floor and they were assaulting him with the hand as he lay on the floor, or how was it?
Correct. Well, as I said, obviously I was speculating about what was happening when he was on the floor. Right. But given the fact that at one time when he was on the floor, when he had disappeared from view, let me rather say, when he had disappeared from view, one of the times they said, do 10 more, do 10 more. I think any reasonable person would realize that he must have been doing some sort of exercise on the floor, particularly given that when he appeared again, he was staggering slightly and wiping his brow and so on. So the assumption I made was that he was doing probably push-ups. And the time that you were speaking about where I heard the cracking noise, that was the time that I again speculated, because I saw a police officer doing something around the waist, his own waist. And then I heard the cracking noise. So it sounded as though Neil was either being hit with a belt at that point or otherwise with the officer's hand. But the movement around the officer's waist seemed to indicate that maybe he was taking a belt off. But as I've said before, this was pure speculation. I wasn't able to see with certainty that was happening. But certainly there was definitely a sound of flesh being struck.
Yesterday you said that you asked the policeman on the 1st of February to buy a newspaper.
Correct.
And that was I given to understand that was the first time that you heard that Dr. Aggett had died in custody.
Correct, yeah. Well, he died on the 5th, and the first thing I got was the newspaper, and nobody told me, even when I was being taken to John Vorster Square on the Saturday morning for a visit, the police officer transporting me didn't tell me anything. I think I may have seen a billboard on the street, but it didn't. I don't think it said Aggett dead. I think it said something like detainee dies in detention or something of that nature. But even when we saw that, there was no conversation from the police, and it was only when I saw my sister, and my sister said, I can't remember if she, but somehow there was an exchange between us that indicated that, I knew that Neil had died, yeah, and she indicated it, yeah.
These banning orders that you spoke about, who was it issued by? Where did it come from?
By the security police, but signed off by the Minister of Police, yeah.
So the Minister would have known that you were a damn person.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. He had to sign the actual banning order, yeah. Which is why, unfortunately for the security police, which is why I ended up being served a banning order in the court, because after I came out of detention, we were told that we couldn't leave Johannesburg without permission from the police, and myself and Liz Floyd and my partner wanted to go down to the Eastern Cape to go and see my mother, and so we got approval from the police to do that. And it was while we were down there that we heard other people had been banned, and when we came back we were supposed to report to the police that we were back, and I didn't. And so in the interim, they had to send the documents down to the Minister of Police to sign them. He was in Cape Town. And so it was very unfortunate for them, because it appeared that they had wanted to issue me the banning order right there and then to stop me testifying. So the minister had to assure the public that I would be allowed to testify in the inquest, which I was allowed to, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Manolo, nothing further.
Thank you. I have no questions to this question. Thank you.
Nothing on re-examination.
Can you just remind me again, what day was it where you say you saw me in the office adjacent to yours, when there was a number of security officers surrounding you? What day was it?
That was on the 25th of January. It was a Monday. And it was the day I'd been brought into Randburg, from Randburg to John Vorster to go to the optician.
No. Vera, did you ever have any encounter to see him in another place?
No. The times I had actually seen him on occasion before that. There were times when I was brought into John Vorster to come and write my own statement. And there were occasions that I saw him also in an office, sitting at a desk, also probably writing a statement. But I never encountered him, I never spoke to him, I just saw him. But the time that I saw him on the 25th of January was the last time that I saw him.
We read evidence from, say, Reverend Chikane and I think that there were times when a detainee has written a statement, it will be torn up. Did it ever happen with you?
No, Judge. That didn't happen at all. No. I think that what happened, if I remember correctly, they may have got me to write statements by hand, and there might have been occasions that they read it and said, no, what about this, what about that? But they didn't tear it up. They just asked me to clarify certain issues, and then eventually I typed a statement. I could type. I had learned how to type at that point in my life, and so they were able to sit me at a typewriter and for me to actually type up the final statement. But it was never torn up. They never, although Captain Van Niekerk did, as I testified yesterday, he did on occasion say to me that I'm lying. I'm not telling him the whole truth. They never actually tore up the statement in the way that I have heard happen to other people.
Well, in their interview with your interrogation, did they ever ask you about Neil?
No, Judge, not at all. No, there was no. They asked me. They may have asked me generally about the other people. That did I know other people had been arrested, and did I know anything about them? But I don't remember anything about Neil. And Neil himself was only arrested, as we said yesterday. I was arrested first on the 22nd of September and then released, and then again on the 24th of November. Neil was then arrested on the 27th of November. So by that time, yeah, I think they didn't see a connection, a direct connection between me and Neil. They would have asked me more about Barbara Hogan. Would have been the key person they would have asked me about, because she was the one who had written the close comrades list on which my name appeared.
Any questions?
Not my lord.
No questions.
Middle, just one question, if I may. Mr. Smithers, during detention, did you ever come across a police officer by the name of Lieutenant Stephen Whitehead?
I don't recall ever coming across him. I might have seen him, and I've seen photographs of him subsequently, but he doesn't strike a bell for me in terms of... There were people like Deercliff, Struvig, Cronwright, and so on that I knew and encountered often, but Whitehead I don't recall at all.
Thank you. No further questions.
You're excused. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you.
Our next witness is Mr. Feroz Kacharia. My learned friend, Mr. Ty Scott, will be leading him.
Okay, come in.
He's been summoned.
Please state your full names and surname.
Feroz Kacharia.
Do you have any objection to taking the oath?
No.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Raise right hand and say, so help me God.
So help me God.
Professor Kacharia.
Morning.
Hi. Thank you for testifying today in this inquest. We're well aware that you experienced quite a traumatic experience in detention back in 1981 and 1982, and it takes a tremendous amount of courage to participate in these proceedings, so thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Please raise your voice.
Sorry, my lord. Mr. Kacharia, you deposed to an affidavit on the 14th of July 2018. Do you confirm its contents?
Yes, I do.
My lord, the affidavit has been entered in as Exhibit D7. I have a spare copy if your lordship requires one. You have a copy, Mr. Kacharia?
Yes.
Professor Kacharia, rather. Professor Kacharia, could you please describe your current occupation to the court?
I'm a professor in the law school at the University of the Witwatersrand.
And what do you teach?
Constitutional law, administrative law, and legal theory.
And Professor Kacharia, back in the early 1980s, what was your occupation at that time?
I was a university student. I think I was an honor student at the time in industrial sociology in the class of Professor Eddie Webster.
Also fits.
That's correct, yes.
And Professor Kacharia, I believe you were quite politically active during that time.
Yes, I was the president of the Black Student Society, I think in 1980. In my home community, I was active in the Benoni student movement. I was active in the anti-psych campaign, and at that time became part of a network across the country of Congress activists who were committed to change in the country, ideologically aligned with the African National Congress. It was a national network, Eastern Cape, Western Cape, Natal, Johannesburg. I was very active on the East Rand, Actonville, with an organization called IRAPO, the East Rand People's Organization. So this network was involved in, trade unions, civic organizations, the student movement, youth organizations, and I was active in many of those structures and networked with, as I say, with that network of activists, many of whom have already testified in these proceedings.
And Professor Kachali, you mentioned that these organizations were aligned with, ideologically aligned with the ANC. Could you just explain to us what that means?
Well, it meant that we were committed to realizing the objectives of the Freedom Charter. We considered our leaders to be in exile or on Robben Island. We wanted them released. We wanted those organizations unbanned. We wanted the establishment of a democracy based on one person, one vote. And we were strongly opposed to the tricameral system, the Bantustans, and all efforts by the National Party to avoid what we considered to be the central question facing South Africa, which was the lack of democracy.
So although you subscribed and followed the ideals of the ANC, those organizations were not ANC organizations?
Well, we adopted the Freedom Charter, for instance. I remember when Mary Moodley died in Benoni, we hoisted the flag of the African National Congress. So we were very clearly ideologically aligned with the African National Congress, but we understood that there were many different ways from a strategic and tactical point of view to pursue our objectives. So some people were involved in underground structures, and they were taking instructions directly from the ANC, and others who were also ideologically aligned with the movement, with the liberation movement, thought that it was prudent, since they were active in mass organizations like trade unions in the public space, to act in pursuance of their ideals without formally taking instructions from the ANC, which was a banned organization. But, people listened to Radio Freedom. We had networks through which we understood what our goals were, as well as how to pursue our objectives, if you like, in the legal space which was emerging in the country post-Vihan, late 70s, early 80s, after the regime had banned the black consciousness organizations. They were trying to defend the status quo by establishing quisling, fraudulent political structures in an effort to stabilize their regime. But that ironically created the space for mass political work. Vihan created the possibility, for instance, legalized African trade unions. That made it possible for an organization like COSATU to re-emerge. And I think that that's what created the difficulty, Justice, for the security police, because we were persuasive in the public domain. We were calling public meetings. We were articulating our objectives openly, but straddling a fine line, if you like, between falling foul of the law and functioning effectively in the legal space that was then developing in the country.
What sort of activities did you specifically participate in as part of your involvement with these organizations?
So on campus, like I say, I was the president of the Black Student Society, and even when I wasn't, I didn't hold a formal position, I was active in its decision-making structures. Our goals were to represent black students on campus and to advance the political struggle, in that case in the tertiary institutions. A lot of our comrades and colleagues were from Turfloop University, people like Diego Seneke, Lawrence Mboya. So our goals were to, whenever there was an opportunity to oppose policies that we considered to be unjust, and to make the demands that we believed were the correct ones, the release of Nelson Mandela, for instance, the unbanning of the African National Congress and the Pan-Africanist Congress. We did so by calling public meetings. When the National Party introduced the South African Indian Council, the tricameral system, we organized public demonstrations on the campus. I remember I was detained once during the state of emergency, participating in such a demonstration. I was active in the anti-psych campaign, which eventually led to the formation of the Transvaal Indian Congress, an affiliate of the United Democratic Front. In Actonville, I helped organize the school boycotts in 1980. I was active in the Benoni student movement as its secretary. Later, I think, I can't remember, all the events in sequence, but we established a civic organization called ARAC, organizing the community around local government issues. As I say, worked with Irapo, somebody like Sam Ntuli, the trade union movement, Umawusa on the East Rand, because we were trying to build a non-racial movement in pursuance of our democratic objectives. At the time, a lot of the people who have already testified were part of a network of people I was associated with in Johannesburg. But we were in contact with people like Trevor Manuel in the Western Cape, people like Praveen Gordon in Natal, Susan Chikalani. So there was a national network of people involved in organizations that eventually came together in the early 1980s to establish the United Democratic Front.
Professor Charles,
Yeah.
I'm just going to move on from that.
Sure.
Your activities ultimately led to you being detained a number of times, I believe.
Yes. So in the year concerning these proceedings, I was detained in November. I think not in December as indicated in the statement. I had been detained that year in June, I believe, released and then banned along with my elder brother, who's now also a judge, and then re-detained in November 1981.
And at this time you were still a student?
Yes, I was an honors student in Professor Eddie Webster's class.
Now, Professor Kachalia, in your later detention of November 1981, and my lord, just to clarify, Professor has indicated that the reference in paragraph 8 of his witness statement where he refers to December 1981 should actually read November. Where were you then taken?
So I was first taken to Verenigen, kept there, I believe, for about a week to 10 days, and then transferred to John Forster Square. I recall on the day that I was transferred having contact, not contact really, but seeing Prema Naidu in the charge office at Vereniging. He was manacled. No, Prema Naidu, who I believe has already testified. He was manacled and he looked disheveled. He looked under a lot of pressure, and he was able to indicate to me that he had been beaten up. So on the way to John Vorster Square, I knew exactly what was in store for me.
What did he tell you about the nature of his beating up?
Well, he was not able to have a conversation with me. He simply gestured that he had been beaten, and I drew the correct inference from the way he conducted himself.
Who were the officers responsible for that initial arrest and who took you to Vereniging? Do you recall?
No, I don't, but I do recall, which was part of the pressure tactics. There were 3 or 4 of them. I was seated in the back of the car together with a police officer at the back and 2 of them in front. I remember that day very clearly for some reason because it was raining. There was a storm, and I was quite anxious. I recall, and on the way we were involved in a car accident. So there was a collision, and I just sort of added to the atmosphere, if you like.
Was any reason given for why you'd been arrested and detained?
No.
You were then moved to John Vorster Square from Vereniging.
Correct.
What happened then?
Well, so I have memories of what happened, but not the exact sequence. I mean, initially I was kept in a large cell, so I don't know if the geography of John Vorster Square has been ventilated in these proceedings. So there was a long corridor on the side, on either side of which was the cells, and then at the end of the corridor, on the corner, there was a large cell where I was originally kept, and then subsequently moved down the corridor to the first cell near the room where we'd be checked out for interrogation, and where they just kept a record, did the day-to-day administration and so forth.
We will spend quite a bit of time dealing with the second floor cell block and what your conditions of detention were. But I think just to keep your testimony structured in a way, if we can start with your interrogation,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your interrogation of John Vorster started how late or how long after you were taken there?
So I don't have precise recollection, Justice. From the statements that I now have before me, the statement that was made to the original inquest, it would seem that for a few days in November, they left me alone, in solitary confinement, of course, and that caused some anxiety because, as others might have explained, we were able to communicate through by emptying out the toilet. And it was clear that more and more people were being detained, people that I was connected with in some way. So I knew they were active, in sort of, if you like, ANC politics, and that they were being interrogated and beaten up. Not all the detainees were involved. in this particular, with us, there was a young man opposite my cell who had been caught trying to get across the Lesotho border, who was being terribly treated. I don't know his name because we didn't share that information. So I reckon the first few days I was left alone, and then at some point they started taking me up to, I think it was the 10th floor, 10th or 11th floor. I was,
Sorry,
yeah,
so
okay.
you say they took you to the 10th floor?
So, apartheid is an interesting system. They had, the white cops did the interrogation and the black cops were responsible for fetching us from the cells. They didn't participate in the assaults.
Do you recall any of the black police officers who would take you from you personally, from your cell to the...
It was the same team. I recall their faces very well. I don't recall the names, no.
That's right. You were then taken to the 10th floor, and who welcomed you there?
So I was interrogated in a room with a kind of, it was like had a very thick metal door. Once they closed that room, I was soundproof. And they would, so the interrogation would start with a beating, with an attempt at intimidation. They'd bring in into that room, close the door, have a saturation strategy. They'd bring in 5 or 6 burly cops, push you around, slap you around, and then get you to start making a statement, a written statement. At that point, they'd leave you under the supervision, in my case anyway, with one police officer, who then stayed throughout while you were writing a statement. Sometimes they'd open the door and so that you could hear other people, other shouts and screams of other detainees. So I think that's how my interrogation started, with a kind of initial assault, and then I started making a statement.
Professor Charlie, we will deal with your assault in quite a bit of detail. At this stage, I think we're just trying to understand who was involved in paint a picture of the 10th floor.
Yeah.
These individuals you identified, you said 5 or 6 different people. Do you recall any of your interrogators, their names, their ranks?
So I recall, the person I recall most vividly is Arthur Cronwright, because he was so mean-spirited. He often came in. He really didn't ever participate in the interrogation. I understood that this was his show. He was in charge of the case, if you like. He was the most senior police officer. He'd come in, insult you, use foul language about your ethnicity, for instance. Maybe give you a slap and then leave. So Cronwright, Whitehead also did that. Whitehead didn't participate directly in my interrogation, I think perhaps except once, where I think I got the most severe beating, but I don't remember exactly. The Prince, I don't have any visual recollection of, but I see his name all over my statement to the earlier Aggett inquest. So warrant officer Prince. I think he must have been in charge of my interrogation. Other people, Swanepoel from Benoni, who had previously detained me in Benoni, so we were well known to each other.
Do you recall what Swanepoel's first name or rank was?
I don't, but I have a very clear recollection of his face.
Would it be a Captain Swanepoel?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. He was, he wasn't the most senior, so I think he was a captain.
Now, Professor Kachalia, you indicated that you would be addressed with foul language by your interrogators. Could you please tell us what some of the language that was used against you?
Well, it's very embarrassing in a way, but I mean, the F word and the C word. I think the use of abusive language, unedifying and calculated to humiliate, was part of their modus operandi, their methodology. Kuli, the F word. Afraid I don't think I can repeat
right.
that.
I think we understand. But this was the typical way that you were interacted with.
Yeah, they break you down. They want to humiliate you. They want to deprive you of any sense of your own dignity or worth, and so forth, so that you become, pliable, willing participant in what they sought to achieve, which was, to break you down, get you either, to provide them with information, to charge others, you could be charged. Otherwise, they wanted to require you to testify, and they also wanted you to identify people they could detain, other people, and that's very stressful because you don't want to be responsible for anyone else's detention.
Okay, so you indicate that Arthur Conright had a personal grudge against Barbara Hogan. What's the basis of that?
Now, I can't recall exactly how I came by this knowledge, but it was urban legend at Wits University that he blamed her, because we were trying to understand, how he'd been transformed into a kind of Frankenstein. I don't think that's an exaggeration. It was part of the history of Wits and the legends at Wits that he blamed her for apparently pushing him off